For centuries, the Roman Empire used all its might to try to exterminate Christianity. Christians were mercilessly persecuted, captured, and condemned to brutal deaths before bloodthirsty crowds. The Colosseum and other arenas became true stages of horror, where men, women, and even children were thrown to the beasts or burned alive for refusing to renounce their faith. But what was meant to serve as a warning of terror ended up becoming the greatest testament of courage the world has ever seen. The trials, executions, and cruelty of the empire could not break the faith of the Christians. On the contrary, it made it even stronger. Each martyr that fell inspired others to follow the same path, and over time, even Roman soldiers and citizens began to question, how could these people face death with such serenity? The blood of Christians, relentlessly shed, became the seed of a faith that Rome could never eradicate. The empire tried to destroy Christianity, but the unyielding faith of the persecuted changed history. From soldiers who faced the Colosseum to monks who dared to challenge the laws, each act of resistance was a crack in Roman dominance. In the end, the empire that tried to crush the cross was the same one that ultimately bowed before it. This is the account of a faith so powerful that not even the greatest empire in history could extinguish it. Before we begin to explore the next topic, take a moment to check if you are subscribed to the channel, because what comes next is a series of incredible videos that will help you better understand the history of Rome and how it can inspire your personal journey. Don't miss any content. Rome was a vast empire, dominating territories from Europe to parts of Asia and North Africa. To maintain control, the Romans imposed strict rules, requiring everyone to follow their traditions, including in religion. Roman gods were worshipped in grand temples, and the emperor was seen as a sacred figure. Those who did not respect this order were considered a threat to the empire, as they questioned the authority of the ruler and jeopardized the stability of the system. The empire did not tolerate those who challenged its laws, and any opposition was met with extreme brutality. Amidst this society, a group emerged that began to change this reality. They were people who believed in a single god and refused to worship the Roman gods or recognize the emperor as divine. They followed the teachings of Jesus Christ and spread a message of love, equality, and hope. This group started small but quickly grew, attracting more and more followers. The Romans saw this as a danger, as a belief that did not adhere to the empire's traditions could lead to disobedience and chaos. To prevent this growth, Rome decided to act. The first persecutions were cruel and began in an isolated manner, but soon became more frequent. In 64 AD, a great fire destroyed much of the city of Rome. Emperor Nero needed to find a scapegoat to calm the populace and chose Christians as his targets. He spread the accusation that they had caused the fire and initiated an unrelenting hunt. Many were arrested and executed in horrific ways, thrown to lions, or burned alive to illuminate the gardens of the imperial palace. The goal was to eradicate this new religion before it became an even bigger problem. Even after Nero's death, Christians continued to be persecuted. Sometimes the empire ignored their existence, but at other times, emperors would attack again with even more violence. In the 3rd century, Emperor Decius decreed that everyone must offer sacrifices to the Roman gods as proof of loyalty to the empire. For Christians, this was unacceptable, as it meant betraying their faith. Those who refused were tortured and killed. Even in the face of these threats, thousands of Christians maintained their belief, preferring death to denying their faith. The empire viewed Christian resistance as a dangerous act of disobedience. Roman rulers believed that the strength of the empire came from the obedience of its people, and any group that questioned this needed to be eliminated. However, something unexpected began to happen. The more Rome persecuted Christians, the stronger their faith became. Stories of people facing death without fear began to spread, inspiring others to convert. Instead of diminishing, the number of Christians grew with each new persecution. By the end of the 3rd century, persecution reached its peak with Emperor Diocletian. he issued decrees ordering the destruction of churches, the burning of sacred writings, and the mass imprisonment of Christians. The punishment for those who refused to abandon their faith was death. Many were taken to arenas and thrown to be devoured by lions, while the crowd watched and cheered. Others were chained and forced to fight against gladiators, knowing they had no chance of survival. Rome believed that with such violence, no one would dare to follow this religion any longer. The plan of Rome, however, did not succeed. Every Christian who died became an example of courage and devotion. People began to question, how could someone be willing to die for a faith if it were not true? Many Romans who witnessed the executions were impressed by the steadfastness of the Christians and, instead of turning away from this religion, began to take an interest in it. The more Rome tried to destroy Christianity, the more it spread. Christians gathered secretly to keep their faith alive. Often, they held hidden meetings in underground catacombs, away from the eyes of the authorities. Even knowing they could be discovered and condemned, they continued praying, reading the scriptures, and strengthening one another. For them, faith was more important than life itself, and this determination allowed Christianity to survive even in the toughest times. Roman rulers began to realize that, despite all the repression, Christians did not disappear. Unlike other rebels, they did not take up arms, did not form armies, and did not try to overthrow the government. On the contrary, they followed the laws of the empire, paid their taxes, and lived peacefully. This led some leaders to question whether they should continue fighting against them. In the early 4th century, one of the most significant events in the history of Christianity changed everything. Constantine, a Roman general vying for the throne, claimed to have seen a shining cross in the sky before a decisive battle. He interpreted this as a divine sign and ordered his soldiers to fight under that symbol. Constantine won the battle and soon after became emperor. After his victory, Constantine made an unexpected decision. In 313 AD, he signed the Edict of Milan, a decree that guaranteed religious freedom for all citizens of the empire. For the first time, Christians could practice their faith without fear of persecution. Churches began to be built freely, and many who had previously hidden their beliefs could now express them without fear. Christianity, which was already strong even under persecution, now grew faster than ever. The following years brought even more surprising changes. Instead of being an enemy of Christianity, the Roman Empire began to embrace the new faith. Shortly thereafter, Christianity was not only accepted but became the official religion of the empire. What was once a persecuted group now became part of the government structure. Churches were erected throughout Roman territory, and the worship of the old gods gradually diminished. Rome tried to destroy Christianity but ended up strengthening it. Persecution, instead of ending the Christian faith, demonstrated to the world the power of resistance and devotion. Those who died as martyrs became symbols of courage, and their stories continued to be told for generations. The empire that once hunted Christians now protected them. The power that sought to erase this faith ultimately bowed before it. In the end, Christianity not only survived the persecutions, it transformed Rome forever. The Romans were always known for their strength and power. Their empire was vast, their cities organized, and their laws kept everything under control. But something began to disturb the rulers, a new faith that was spreading more and more. Christians believed in a single God, refused to worship the Roman gods, and did not pay homage to the emperor as a deity. For Rome, this was a threat. The empire did not accept people who challenged its traditions. So, they decided to act cruelly to put an end to this belief once and for all. The Colosseum, one of the greatest symbols of Rome, became a site of execution. But not just it. Other arenas scattered throughout the empire were also used to brutally punish Christians. The goal was clear: to scare anyone thinking of following this faith. The rulers wanted to turn these deaths into a warning, showing the people what would happen to those who did not obey Rome's orders. Christians were captured and brought before crowds filling the stands to witness the terrible spectacles. When the moment of execution arrived, Christians did not scream or try to flee. They knew what awaited them, but did not show fear. They sang hymns and prayed until the last moment. This left many spectators bewildered. People were used to seeing the condemned begging for their lives, but these men and women accepted death with serenity. What made them so courageous? Where did such strength come from? This behavior began to awaken curiosity, and what was meant to be a warning against the Christian faith ended up drawing even more attention to it. Instead of driving people away from Christianity, the executions had the opposite effect. The courage of the Christians spread like a story told from mouth to mouth. What should have been a spectacle of punishment became a testimony of unwavering faith. The Romans began to question whether the gods they worshipped were really that powerful. After all, if Christians were willing to die without hesitation, perhaps their faith was true. The Christian message, which spoke of love, forgiveness, and eternal life, seemed much stronger than the beliefs that Rome tried to impose by force. The persecutions became increasingly violent. The emperors realized that simply killing Christians was not enough. So, they decided to torture them before execution. They wanted them to publicly renounce their faith to show the people that even the followers of Christ did not fully believe in what they preached. But the strategy failed. Even in the face of the worst tortures, most refused to deny their faith. Some were scourged until they fainted, others had their bodies burned, but few yielded. The empire was faced with a challenge it did not know how to overcome. Among the most remembered martyrs is Perpetua, a young woman from a noble family, and her servant, Felicity. Both were imprisoned for being Christians. They were given several chances to deny their faith and save their lives, but they refused them all. They were taken to the arena, where they faced wild beasts. Even in the face of death, they remained calm. When the final moment arrived, Perpetua guided the executioner's sword to her own neck. Her story was told for centuries and became a symbol of Christian resistance. Another famous case is that of Polycarp, an elderly man who led Christians in his city. When he was captured, the soldiers tried to convince him to surrender. But he replied, "I have served Christ for many years, and he has never disappointed me. How could I deny my Lord now?" He was taken to be burned alive. But, according to witnesses of the time, the flames did not touch him as expected, and his body seemed to shine. In the astonishment of the Romans, a soldier had to kill him with a spear. This episode made more people begin to believe that God was with the Christians. The empire tried various tactics to put an end to the new faith. Besides torture and death, they began to prohibit Christian gatherings. Churches were destroyed, scriptures were burned, and anyone found praying could be arrested. But Christians found ways to continue meeting. They held secret worship services in caves and catacombs, away from the eyes of Roman soldiers. These secret meetings helped keep the faith alive and spread the teachings of Christ. Even with so many difficulties, the number of Christians continued to grow. Many Romans who had previously followed the traditions of the empire began to convert. This caused despair among the rulers. They realized that persecution was not working. The bloodshed in public spectacles, instead of destroying Christianity, was strengthening it. The empire no longer knew what to do. Christians were transforming the history of Rome without taking up arms, without leading revolts, only with their faith and determination. The emperors who came after tried to maintain the persecution, but they realized they were fighting against something impossible to stop. Christianity was like a flame that kept growing, impossible to extinguish. Even Roman soldiers began to convert, as they witnessed the courage of the Christians up close. Some refused to follow orders to kill the followers of Christ and were killed alongside them. The empire was facing a revolution that could not be won with swords or lions. In the early 4th century, something surprising happened. Emperor Constantine, who had previously persecuted Christians, decided to change sides. It is said that before a battle, he had a vision of a cross shining in the sky and heard a voice saying, "With this sign, you will conquer." After winning the war, he declared that Christianity would no longer be prohibited. Shortly thereafter, the religion that Rome tried to destroy became one of the most important in the empire. The persecution, which lasted for centuries, finally came to an end. What began as a small group of followers spread until it became an unstoppable force. The martyrs who were executed did not die in vain. Their sacrifice served as inspiration for generations, showing that faith can withstand even the worst trials. Rome tried to silence Christianity, but in the end, it was Rome that bowed before it. What happened to the persecuted Christians became one of the greatest proofs of resilience ever seen. They were persecuted, tortured, and killed, but they never gave up. Today, their stories continue to be told, reminding the world that true faith can overcome any obstacle. The empire that once tried to erase Christianity ended up helping to make it one of the most influential religions in history. The times of persecution are in the past, but the example of the martyrs has never been forgotten. They faced the worst that Rome could offer and emerged victorious, not with weapons or armies, but with courage and unwavering belief. The bloodshed did not destroy the faith, it only spread it further. And in the end, the truth they tried to silence ended up conquering the empire itself. So, did you know that the Roman Empire tried in every way to end Christianity, but ended up being transformed by it? Have you heard of this brutal persecution that could have completely changed the course of world history? Now, think about what history would be like if Rome had succeeded in erasing Christianity. What would have happened if the outcome had been different? How would this affect the world we live in today? Let us know in the comments if you are already aware of this epic persecution and its importance. If this topic interests you, share your opinion and spread this knowledge. We are curious to know what you think. In ancient times, Rome was the most powerful force in the world. Its legions dominated vast territories, its laws were followed by millions, and its culture spread to every corner of the empire. But there was a group of people who refused to obey certain orders from the emperor. They were not armed warriors, did not form armies, and did not conspire against the government. They were simple men and women who followed a different faith, believing in a single God and a Savior named Jesus Christ. For the empire, this was something unacceptable. Roman religion was based on the worship of multiple gods, and the emperor was seen as a divine figure. All citizens were required to pay homage to the gods of the empire and demonstrate loyalty to the emperor by burning incense before his statue. For most people, this was merely a formality of little importance. But for Christians, it meant betraying their faith. They believed there was only one true God and could not worship him alongside other gods or a mortal man. This refusal sparked the wrath of Rome. Roman leaders viewed Christians as stubborn and dangerous. They refused to follow traditions that united the empire and were thus considered a threat to the established order. The government began to persecute these followers of Christ, organizing trials for them to publicly renounce their faith. The objective was clear: force them to obey or eliminate them. Courts were set up in various cities, and anyone suspected of being a Christian could be brought to trial. During these trials, Christians were pressured to deny their faith. Judges tried to convince them in every way possible, saying that all they needed to do was a simple gesture, offer a sacrifice to the Roman gods, or throw a bit of incense before the statue of the emperor. Some Christians, fearing death, yielded and did what the judges asked. But many refused, even knowing they would be condemned to torture and death. For them, denying their faith was worse than any physical suffering. The punishments inflicted on those who refused to obey were brutal. Some were whipped until they lost consciousness, others were locked in damp, dark dungeons without food or water, waiting for the day of their execution. Many were forced to step on images of Christ as a final test of loyalty to the empire. But, surprisingly, a large number of Christians resisted. They preferred to face any pain rather than betray their belief. Executions were carried out in public, with the intention of spreading fear. The empire wanted everyone to see what happened to those who challenged the authority of Rome. But the effect was the opposite. People began to wonder how it was possible that ordinary men and women accepted death with such serenity. Many faced the executioners singing hymns, praying, and even smiling. They did not scream, did not beg for mercy, did not resist. The soldiers tasked with executing Christians began to notice something strange. They had seen many condemned to death, but they had never encountered people like these. The Christians seemed stronger than the executioners themselves. In some stories, Roman soldiers were so moved by the faith of the condemned that they threw their weapons to the ground and declared that they too were Christians. This meant they would be killed alongside those they had been sent to eliminate. In one of these trials, a young Christian was brought before a Roman governor. The official tried to convince him in every way to abandon his faith, saying that everything could end there if he would just throw a handful of incense on the emperor's altar. The young man looked into the governor's eyes and calmly said, "My Lord died for me. I cannot deny him who has never denied me." Silence filled the courtroom. The governor knew there was nothing he could say to make him change his mind. The young man was sentenced to death, but his courage echoed for centuries, inspiring thousands of Christians throughout history. The empire tried for years to eradicate this religion. They sent out orders to imprison, torture, and execute Christians in every possible way. But to Rome's surprise, the more people died for their faith, the more Christianity spread. The blood of the martyrs became the seed that made the faith grow. The Christian message, which once seemed fragile and insignificant, was now becoming impossible to erase. Time passed, and in the year 313 AD, something unexpected happened. Emperor Constantine, who had previously followed Roman customs, had an experience that changed his life forever. During a battle, he had a vision of a shining cross in the sky and heard a voice saying, "With this sign, you will conquer." He ordered his soldiers to place the symbol of the cross on their shields and marched into battle. Against all odds, he emerged victorious. After this victory, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan. The Edict of Milan was a document that guaranteed religious freedom for Christians throughout the empire. This meant that after centuries of persecution, the followers of Christ could finally worship their God without fear of being imprisoned or killed. It was the beginning of a change that would transform Rome forever. In less than a century, Christianity went from a persecuted faith to becoming the official religion of the empire. What was once seen as a threat was now accepted and protected by the emperor himself. Those who had been judged, scourged, and executed by the empire ended up shaping the future of Rome itself. The empire that once tried to destroy Christianity ultimately surrendered to the faith it had so fiercely pursued. What began as a despised minority became one of the largest religions in history. This proved that not even the might of the greatest empire of the time could extinguish the flame of Christian faith. Before we move on to the next topic, I noticed you haven't liked this video yet. This is super important as it helps YouTube promote our content to more people, allowing us to continue bringing you more information to help you. So, don't waste any time, leave your like here, it's free and makes all the difference. Thanks. In the darkest times of the Roman Empire, when the blood of innocents flowed on the arena floors to entertain a crowd thirsty for violence, a simple man made a decision that would forever change the history of Christianity. His name was Telemachus. Telemachus was not a warrior, did not seek glory, nor yearned for battles. He was a monk, a man of faith, who dedicated his life to prayer and the search for God. But upon hearing reports of the cruel spectacles of the Colosseum, he felt his soul burn with indignation. Human life could not be treated as mere entertainment. Telemachus lived far from the great cities, in a peaceful monastery, where he spent his days in prayer and contemplation. There, he had everything he needed to live in tranquility. However, something inside him would not let him be at peace. The screams of those dying in the Colosseum echoed in his mind, even though he had never been there. How could a man of God ignore such injustice? How could he continue his life of prayer while lives were being reaped to amuse an insensitive crowd? The Colosseum was the stage for brutal spectacles. The crowd gathered there to see gladiators fighting to the death. Prisoners were being torn apart by wild beasts, and Christians were being executed under the impassive eyes of the rulers. For Rome, all of this was part of a tradition, a way to keep the people distracted and reinforce the authority of the empire. But for Telemachus, it was an affront to the teachings of Christ, who preached love and compassion. He made a courageous decision. He left behind his spiritual refuge and traveled to Rome, willing to face the greatest test of his life. The city was in celebration. Thousands of people filled the streets, walking towards the imposing Colosseum, where yet another day of bloody battles was about to begin. Telemachus followed the crowd, his heart pounding. He knew he was walking toward something grand, but also dangerous. Upon entering the Colosseum, he felt a shiver run through his body. It was as if he were stepping onto a battlefield, a place where death was treated as a spectacle. He sat among the spectators and watched the event begin. 2 gladiators were brought into the arena. The crowd cheered, clamoring for the fight. The sound of drums echoed, marking the rhythm of the battle that was about to commence. But Telemachus could not just watch. He felt he needed to act. Suddenly, in an impulse he could not even explain, he stood up from his seat and ran into the arena. The crowd was in shock. Who was this frail man who dared to interrupt the spectacle? The gladiators hesitated, surprised by the unexpected presence. Telemachus raised his arms and, with a strong voice, proclaimed, "In the name of Christ, stop this." Silence fell over the Colosseum. For a brief moment, it seemed as if time had stopped. The gladiators looked at each other, confused. The audience murmured. The emperor himself, present in the arena, watched the scene with curiosity. But soon the crowd began to grow irritated. They did not want their spectacle interrupted. The Colosseum demanded blood, and now Telemachus was the target. Shouts echoed from the stands. Stones began to be thrown at the monk. Some reports say that one of the gladiators, pressured by the crowd, dealt the fatal blow. Others claim it was the empire's own guards who attacked him. What is known for sure is that there, before thousands of people, Telemachus fell, his blood mingling with the sand of the arena. But something different happened that day. What should have been just another banal death inside the Colosseum transformed into an unforgettable event. The silence that followed Telemachus' death was more deafening than any applause. The crowd, accustomed to cheering for violent deaths, remained silent this time. For the first time, the Colosseum echoed not with shouts of hatred, but with reflection. In the following days, the story of Telemachus spread throughout Rome. His act of courage was discussed in taverns, homes, and temples. People began to wonder, why did that man risk his life to interrupt the games? Why was he so determined to stop that massacre? The impact was so profound that even Emperor Honorius, touched by the monk's courage, made a historic decision. Shortly thereafter, the imperial decree was announced: gladiatorial combat was officially prohibited. Never again would men be forced to fight to the death to entertain the people. The Colosseum, which had been a stage of blood and cruelty for centuries, fell silent. The arenas, once filled with violence, were now empty. Telemachus' sacrifice was not in vain. With his unwavering faith, he did what no army could: he silenced the Colosseum forever. His name was etched in history as the man who challenged an empire and won without raising a single weapon. His example proved that, often, true strength lies not in the sword, but in the courage to confront injustice with truth. Telemachus' martyrdom served as a beacon for Christianity, showing that faith, when lived with courage, has the power to transform even the hardest of hearts. Rome tried to silence his message with death, but ironically, his sacrifice was the spark that ended the era of gladiators. His act of bravery transcended centuries, inspiring generations to fight for a more just and humane world. In the end, Telemaco proved that a single man, when guided by faith and justice, can change history. He faced the fury of the Colosseum, challenged the bloodlust of an empire, and showed the world that true power does not lie in brute force, but in the courage to defend what is right. His legacy lives on today, reminding everyone that the voice of truth can be more powerful than any sword. The story of the clash between Rome and Christianity is one of the most fascinating and impactful of all time. The empire, which tried to crush the Christian faith with brutal persecutions, ultimately bowed before it. What began as a small persecuted community grew to transform the very heart of Rome and shape the world as we know it today. But this is not just a story of the past. It carries profound lessons about resistance, faith, and transformation. If Rome, the greatest empire of its time, could not erase Christianity, what does that teach us about the strength of true belief? Stay tuned, because the empire against the cross, how Rome tried to destroy Christianity and surrender to the faith reveals not only what happened, but also what it means for us today. If this content resonated, leave your comment, share your opinion, and keep following for more stories that challenge everything we thought we knew. Thank you for watching until now. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to receive more content. Until the next video.